on the southern border. In your judgment, in your, I think, 20-some years of experience, is there an illegal drug crisis, illegal drug emergency on our southern border?
Yes, sir.
There is.
Yes, sir.
Is there a gang and cartel crisis and emergency on our southern border?
Yes, sir.
And is there also a human trafficking crisis emergency situation on our southern border?
Yes, there is.
So there is, all three.
Yes, sir.
We got a drug emergency, we got a human trafficking emergency, we got a gang and cartel emergency on our southern border. Mr. Carroll, is there a drug crisis emergency on our southern border?
Yes, sir. There's a drug crisis in our country, and all of the drugs that are here are coming into our country. The fatal drugs are coming from overseas, Mexico, China.
Is there also a gang and drug cartel problem on our southern border?
Absolutely. There's no question.
And associated with this cartel activity is a human trafficking problem on our southern border. Would you call that an emergency or a crisis as well?
And they're absolutely related, because these traffickers who are just completely morally depraved will trade anything. They'll trade in drugs, they'll trade in weapons, they'll trade in children, they'll trade in human lives.
We got two experts here today, Mr. Chairman, on our panel, two experts with experience in this area, one 20-some years in law enforcement, who says there's a drug crisis emergency, there's a human trafficking crisis emergency, there is a gang and cartel violence emergency on our district, or on our southern border. Let me go back to another point that was raised earlier. One of the earlier members, I believe it was Ms. Wasserman Schultz, said 90% of drugs captured are captured at ports of entry. And Mr. Higgins disagreed with that. But let's just assume for a second that Ms. Wasserman Schultz is right. Mr. McDaniel, does it surprise you that drugs are captured where there's actually law enforcement personnel?
No, sir. No surprise at all.
That's kind of common sense, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Like, wow, we're actually capturing drugs where there are law enforcement personnel at the ports of entry. But we're also capturing some where there aren't ports of entry, and my guess is, call me just some common sense guy from Western Ohio, my guess is a lot of drugs are moving across the border where there aren't any good guys to stop them, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And hence the reason we need a barrier, hence the reason we need some kind of border security wall to help with that situation, to deal with this crisis that's all over our country, as the director points out. Would you agree with that, Mr. McDaniel?
I would agree with that.
It's just good common sense. So this argument that, oh, most of the drugs seized are at ports of entry, well, for goodness sakes, that's where we have law enforcement right there. Of course that's going to happen. But there is all kinds of bad stuff coming across where there aren't the good guys to stop the bad stuff. Mr. McDaniel, would you agree with all that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, to the point Mr. Higgins made, how much is actually seized, though, where there aren't ports of entry? We're still catching some of it, right? We're still getting some of it.
Yes, sir.
Is it more or less than what we're getting at the ports of entry?
More between the...
So between ports of entry, Democrats say, oh, we're only getting at the ports of entry. Said, well, of course we are. We're getting, because we got law enforcement there. But between the ports of entry, out where they can just cross and there aren't law enforcement personnel right there, we're still capturing some there at some points, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Is it more or less than what we're getting at the ports of entry?
There's no way to tell, because the big unknown is what are we missing?
Yeah,
and
of course.
Obviously, we're missing a lot.
Of course. Of course. Mr. Carroll, have anything to add to all that?
Yes, sir. I mean, obviously, I completely agree with Mr. McDaniel. In terms of if you just go by weight, and I mean, I can break it down by drug if you would like, but and the numbers that I have from Customs and Border Protection for 2018 reflects the total weight of drugs at ports of entry in 2018 was 432,000 pounds of various drugs. Between ports of entry for the same time frame, fiscal year 2018, 476,000
So actually
pounds.
more even.
In terms of total weight, I can break it down by drug if you want.
So here's my big question I want to ask for the other side. Because just a few weeks ago, that enough fentanyl was captured to kill 57 million Americans. You remember with this story when this happened? Yeah, just a few weeks back, right?
Yes, sir.
50. So if that's not an emergency, somebody tell me what is. Enough fentanyl to kill 58 million? 59 million? I mean, how bad does it have to get before we actually say this is an emergency? For goodness sakes, we got the two experts who said it's an emergency on illegal drug trafficking, illegal human trafficking, and of course the gang and cartel violence. It's an emergency, and there's no way around it. Let's do everything we can to deal with the problem. Again, I want to thank you all for being here and for your fine testimony today. I yield back.